So, like, I've been seeing this guy's videos for forever now, and I've watched so many of them. But I am so interested in this one video that I saw. It's called The 12 New Countries That Might Exist Soon. And I'm like, wait, I thought we stopped, like, creating countries like, decades and decades ago. Like, I thought that was no longer a thing that we did anymore, was like create new countries and stuff like that. Anyways, I'm I'm so interested to watch this video, bro.
As
Real
history continues
real life lore. Go subscribe to this guy. I'm gonna put the link in chat.
evolving with time, new and old countries come in and out of existence pretty much all the time. Dozens of new UN-recognized countries have come into existence in only the past 30 plus years since the Cold War began coming to a close back in 1990. And as a result, the world map has officially changed dozens of times in many of our lifetimes. East Germany faded out of existence in 1990 when it was legally absorbed by West Germany. Between 1990 and 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union led to the birth of 15 newly recognized independent states.
Wait,
and
really?
arguably a 16th in the form of Chechnya, which is a really interesting case study in how countries can be born and die. Chechnya, an ethnically and religiously distinct territory of Russia, unilaterally declared its independence from the Soviet Union and Russia in 1991, and remained a de facto independent state for nearly a decade until it was forcefully resubjugated.
I'm sorry, bro. Like, I love your videos, but who colored this in? Like, what did we? What happened?
The Russian armed forces in 2000. During that whole time, though, the only other country that ever formally recognized Chechnya's independence was Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. Chechnya fought two massive and brutal wars of independence against the Russians in the 1990s. The first from 1994 to 96 that killed more than 100,000 people and resulted in their de facto independence. And the second war from 1999 to 2000 when the Russians finally overran Chechnya and reincorporated it back into the Russian state. Many high-ranking Chechen government officials then fled the country and formed a Chechen government in exile in London that has continued existing to this day. While in October of 2022, in the midst of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government voted to formally recognize Chechnya's status as being temporarily occupied by Russia, and recognize the Chechen government in exile as the territory's sole legitimate government, essentially extending Ukraine's legal recognition of Chechnya as an independent state now. The process of Yugoslavia's collapse
Like,
after
I feel like a lot of states do, or some countries do this, where they're like, I'm gonna make this area a country, but we're gonna be surrounded on almost every side by another country. Bro, you're just asking to be invaded.
Chechnya as an independent state now. The process of Yugoslavia's
Like, there was only 1 out of 4 sides that wasn't covered by Russia. That's not a good place to start from.
collapse after 1991 similarly led to the creation of 6 or 7 new independent countries depending on your point of view. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and the formerly united Serbia and Montenegro all emerged by the early 2000s, while Montenegro further declared its own independence from Serbia in 2006. And then Kosovo unilaterally declared their independence from Serbia too in 2008, which remains legally disputed by Serbia and therefore remains
Am I tripping? Or, like, I didn't even know half of these places were countries at any point.
controversial. In 1993, Czechoslovakia split into 2 new countries, Czechia and Slovakia. The same year, Eritrea managed to finally declare their own independence from Ethiopia after another decades-long independence struggle. In 1994, Palau, a small Pacific island state, achieved its sovereignty and effective independence from the United States. In 2002, East Timor became the first new independent country to emerge in the 21st century, after a long independence struggle against Indonesia. And then in 2011, South Sudan finally achieved its own independence from the rest of Sudan after another decades-long independence struggle that resulted in it becoming the world's youngest widely recognized independent state and member of the United Nations, at least for now. Dozens of new countries became independent across the 1990s, but since the 21st century began, we've only seen the 4 mostly widely recognized examples of East Timor, Montenegro, Kosovo, and South Sudan happen so far. And no more widely recognized examples have taken place in the past 13 years now since 2011. And that begs an interesting question. What are the most likely new countries that have the possibility to emerge on the world stage next? There are many, many possibilities out there that I'll cover in this video and many others that I won't. I'm not going to cover any states here that are
I don't know, like, I'm assuming that North Korea and South Korea used to be one country, right? And then isn't it Ireland used to be one country, but now it's like Ireland and South Ireland or something like that? I don't remember how it goes.
already exist in a de facto sense but lack wide-scale international recognition.
But like I've heard that they don't like each other that much in Ireland and South Ireland or whatever. It might be Ireland and North Ireland. I don't remember.
Kosovo, claimed by Serbia, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, claimed by Morocco, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, claimed by Cyprus, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, claimed by Georgia, Transnistria, claimed by Moldova, Somaliland, claimed by Somalia, or the Republic of China on Taiwan, claimed by the People's Republic of China on the mainland. I'm only going to cover potential new independent states that don't yet exist in either a legal de jure sense, nor in a de facto sense. And so, to start this list off, it seems most likely right now that the next newest country that'll emerge soon and that'll probably also be widely recognized as the 194th member of the United Nations will be Bougainville in the Western Pacific. Bougainville is
That's such a crazy name. Bougainville? For a country. Why is it named like it's a state or a town in Missouri?
geographically the westernmost and largest island in the Solomon Islands archipelago.
Bougainville.
But while the rest of the Solomon Islands are an independent nation, Bougainville has long been politically a part of Papua New Guinea instead. The history dates back to the very end of the 19th century in 1899, when the colonial German Empire laid claim to Bougainville and annexed it into their nearby colony of German New Guinea. Then during World War I, the Australians invaded and occupied the German colony of New Guinea, including Bougainville. And after the war's conclusion in 1920, all of modern-day Papua New Guinea became an Australian mandate through the League of Nations, which led to a long era of more than 60 years of nearly continuous Australian administration of the territory that was only briefly interrupted by the Japanese invasion of World War II. After the war, Papua New Guinea evolved into a UN mandate under Australian administration. And then in the 1960s, Australian geologists discovered that Bougainville had massive deposits of copper on the island.
Oh no!
So, the Australian authorities did what every other colonial government at the time was doing and set up a huge copper mine on the island in 1972.
Rare resources, they're getting plundered, bro. It's GG's.
That at the time was the largest open pit mine operating anywhere in the world. The copper mine quickly became hugely important to the economy of Papua New Guinea. It alone produced more than 45% of Papua New Guinea's entire national export revenue, and the government received 20% of the mine's total profits, of which the indigenous people of Bougainville themselves only received a 0.5% to 1.25% share of the total profit. Thousands of outside workers from the Papua New Guinea mainland and from Australia came to work at the Bougainville mine across the—
Wait, that's... Why is... Wait, is this the real place in real life? Why is that the most beautiful mine I've ever seen? Okay, this has gotta be what Minecraft is based off of, bro. I don't know.
1970s.
I don't know what
and as
to
more
say.
of them came and most of the profits left the island, the indigenous people on Bougainville began growing increasingly resentful. There are massive cultural and linguistic differences between the Papua New Guinea mainland and Bougainville. Papua New Guinea itself is usually classified as being the most linguistically diverse country in the entire world, with no less than 893 separate languages that are known to be spoken in the country. It's also extremely rural, with only about 13% of the population today living in cities across some of the most challenging mountainous and rainforest terrain on the planet. Papua New Guinea is still such an isolated and remote part of the world that there isn't even an accepted consensus on what the country's actual population is, still today. The government officially reports their population today to be about 9.4 million. But there were credible studies conducted as recently as December of 2022 that estimate the true population of the country is actually closer to 17 million people, nearly double what the government actually reports. Compared to the Papua New Guinea mainland, Bougainville is much smaller and less populated, with only around 300—
Did you see how many people were staring at the person recording? I don't know why I find that so funny.
1,000 residents today, whose culture and ethnicity is more closely related to the Melanesians of the neighboring
Hi!
Solomon Islands than to the Papua New Guinea mainland. And so, perhaps understandably, conflict began to bubble up to the surface between Bougainville and Papua New Guinea after the opening of the massive open-pit copper mine in the early 1970s. Australia granted Papua New Guinea its independence in September of 1975 that included Bougainville. But just a few days before the independence was granted, Bougainville unilaterally declared itself as the independent Republic of the North Solomons instead. But after it failed to gain any international recognition, Bougainville agreed on a settlement several months later in August of 1976 to become absorbed.
You know what? I'm changing up, bro. Like, I fuck with Bougainville. Like, I think that's such a hard name for a country.
Into Papua New Guinea with a degree of political autonomy. But tensions between Bougainville and the Papua New Guinea government over the continued operation of the mine on the island continued growing until they exploded in outright rebellion in 1988, when a separatist faction on the island called the Bougainville Revolutionary Army rose up to fight for Bougainville's independence. This resulted in a
The Bougainville Revolutionary Army?
Revolutionary Army rose up in 1988, when a separatist faction on the island called the Bougainville Revolutionary Army
that goes hard.
Rose up to fight for Bougainville's independence. This resulted in a truly devastating, decade-long war for independence that lasted until 1998, and which has been described by leaders as the largest military conflict to have been fought in the region.
Nah, that name goes so hard, it makes me hard.
Of Oceania since the Second World War, as the Papua New Guinea government cracked down on Bougainville hard in order to maintain their access to the island's crucial copper mine. Papua New Guinea enforced a total maritime blockade of the island and deployed thousands of their soldiers to the island to enforce Papua New Guinea's authority. Estimates vary greatly as to how many people were killed in the decade-long war, but it's usually estimated that between 15,000 and 20,000 people in Bougainville died during the conflict, while at least 300 Papua New Guinea soldiers were killed and thousands more were wounded. That means that in the
Damn, bro. Now I feel so bad for the Bougainvillans.
Decade-long war for independence between 1988 and 1998, roughly 10% of Bougainville's entire pre-war population died, while tens of thousands more were placed into internally displaced person camps. The two warring sides agreed on a ceasefire in 1997.
Poor
Bougainvillans. Forces began withdrawing from the island the following year in 1998, while Australian peacekeepers came in to take their place. A formal peace agreement was settled between Bougainville and the Papua New Guinea government in 2001 that solidified Bougainville's status as a fully autonomous part of the country, and which also granted Bougainville the right to hold a non-binding referendum on outright independence within 20 years in the future. That promised referendum was eventually held in Bougainville at the end of 2019, which saw an absolutely overwhelming vote of 98.3% of voters on the island choosing independence, with a huge 87.4% voter turnout, showing that the will of the Bougainville people clearly desired independence.
Yeah.
And though the referendum was technically non-binding on the part of the Papua New Guinea government, the overwhelming results of it for independence and all of the previous history have made it extremely difficult for the government just to simply ignore it. And so in July of 2021, Bougainville and the Papua New Guinea government came to an agreement that Bougainville will be granted its formal independence from the country no earlier than 2025 and no later than 2027, pending legal ratification by the Papua New Guinea Parliament. And although to date, when this video was made, that ratification hasn't been given yet, it seems fairly certain still that Bougainville will become the world's next largely...
Why did I... ow, fuck. Why did I... Oh, holy shit. Why did I just get such a bad headache? Bro, I feel like my brain's about to explode. What the hell? I'm gonna Jimmy Neutron brain blast brain blast all over the place, bro.
Recognized independent country sometime by 2027.
Ow.
Will likely replace South Sudan as the world's youngest independent country by then. But what about other, less likely candidates for new countries to emerge? Relatively nearby to Bougainville is also New Caledonia, which is probably, at least in my opinion, the next most likely place to eventually become a newly independent country. New Caledonia currently still remains as a legal overseas territory of France, despite the fact that the island is
is there an old Caledonia, or am I missing something?
In the Pacific, and is located about 17,000 kilometers away from metropolitan France over on the other side of the world in Europe. The French annexed New Caledonia back in 1853, and ever since then, successive waves of European, Polynesian, and other settlers have come to the island that have made the indigenous ethnic Kanak people on the island a minority, where today they only represent about 41% of New Caledonia's total population of about 270,000 people, with Europeans representing another 24% of the population and various Polynesians and other groups representing most of the rest. For decades under French colonial rule in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the indigenous Kanak were largely marginalized, excluded from the island's economy, and eventually confined to a system of reservations like indigenous Americans were in the Western Hemisphere. By the 1970s, a modern independence and sovereignty movement began growing in popularity among the indigenous.
Why does it have to be every single indigenous people get fucked over all the time? I'm so, like, I'm not even grifting at this point. Like, I am so sick of hearing this shit every single time. The people who originally lived somewhere get fucked over. It's actually ridiculous.
Indigenous Kanak people on the island who are frustrated with their lower socioeconomic status relative to the European settlers of the island. And so the movement steadily adopted more violent methods to advance their cause. The biggest violent incident occurred in 1988, when a group of 30 heavily armed Kanak independence fighters attacked a French military outpost on the island, killing 4 French soldiers and taking another 36 people, including some civilians, as hostages. The group demanded that the hostages would be released in exchange for serious talks with the French government on the independence of New Caledonia. France refused to negotiate and deployed a crack hostage recovery team made up of dozens of French commandos, paratroopers, and GIGN counter-terror specialists to raid them instead.
Wait, and they didn't surrender? What the fuck? Wait, the French people didn't just surrender? That's insane. Wait, that's a first, bro.
In the ensuing raid, the French killed 19 of the Kanak hostage takers and successfully freed all of the hostages, while 2 of the French soldiers in the assault team were also killed, resulting in the total deaths of 25 people during the bloody incident. In the aftermath, the French government and the Kanak independence movement agreed on a 10-year truce to secure stability on the island. And after the decade had passed in 1998 without any other major incidents, the French government.
Brother, why can't we just leave the people who already live somewhere? Why can't we just leave them alone? Like, why did we have to have countries that are bigger and more powerful just claim countries where people already live? Why do we have to keep doing this shit?
And the major pro and anti-independence parties on the island all signed the Noumea Accord, which established a 20-year transitional period until 2018 in which certain powers would be transferred to the local government, and which also guaranteed that after those 20 years, beginning in 2018, New Caledonia would be allowed to host 3 separate independence referendums that would determine the island's future political status. And so, the first of these independence referendums in New Caledonia was hosted in 2018. Which was soundly rejected, with 56.7% of voters choosing to remain with France and only 43.3% of voters choosing independence, with a total voter turnout on the island of 81%. Then the second independence referendum was hosted a couple years later in 2020 that grew much more narrow. This time with only 53.3% of voters choosing to remain with France and 46.7%.
That makes a lot of sense, bro.
Of voters choosing to become independent, with an even higher voter turnout this time of 85.7%. The momentum appeared to be rising for the pro-independence side, and with the final referendum on independence scheduled for December 2021, all eyes were fixated on what would happen next. But in between the second and third referendums, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the island and ravaged.
Of course, bro. It's the fucking usual suspect. Fucking COVID-19, bro.
Which resulted in more than 300 deaths that disproportionately affected the indigenous Kanak community that was more pro-independence. It quickly became clear that the next referendum would take place during a period of customary mourning within the Kanak community for their lost ones. But the government's health restrictions had made campaigning for the final referendum largely impossible. So, the pro-independence parties on the island became worried that this would all contribute to a lower voter turnout than in either of the previous referendums. And so, they began asking the French government to reschedule the final referendum until after the pandemic had settled down more. But the French government refused to reschedule the referendum and went ahead with it as originally
Bro, they rigged it! They rigged that shit! What the fuck?
planned in December of 2021. Which led to all of the pro-independence parties on the island announcing that they would boycott the vote in protest. As a result, the Remain with France choice secured an overwhelming 96.5% of the 2021 vote, while only 3.5% of voters chose independence. And with a very low voter turnout this time of only 43.9% of the island, since all the pro-independence parties had boycotted it. But none of that stopped France's president.
Bro, they fucking cheated. They cheated. What? That is not fair at all.
Emmanuel Macron from visiting New Caledonia himself afterwards, where he proudly proclaimed that the 2021 vote had confirmed the will of Caledonians to stay French. While he further emphasized
This is why my friend hates French people. I understand now. I understand now, bro.
that New Caledonia had a vital role to play in France's geopolitical strategy for the Indo-Pacific region. New Caledonia places sovereign French territory relatively nearby to the South China Sea, Taiwan, and China, while New Caledonia, much like Bougainville, is also rich in specific natural resources. New Caledonia is specifically home to between 10% and 25% of all the world's proven reserves of nickel, a metal that is becoming increasingly important as a major component of batteries and electric vehicles. France's control over New Caledonia makes it the fourth largest producer of nickel in the entire world, remaining only behind the likes of Russia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. After the controversial 2021 referendum, France has publicly left open the possibility that another referendum on independence could be hosted in New Caledonia again, within the time span of 1 or 2 more generations from now. Or in other words, maybe in 20 to 40 years from now. But the pro-independence parties in New Caledonia have all adamantly rejected this timeline, and they're currently in the process of attempting to challenge the 2021 referendum results to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. But it's unclear if the court will actually even agree to hear their case or not.
They
As it stands
absolutely
now,
should.
New Caledonia's near-term future looks like it will continue remaining as a part of France. But in the more distant future, another referendum could potentially always happen that could lead to the island's independence eventually.
Like, I'm sure France has more money to, like, be able to help this country, but it sounds like they're fucking over the indigenous people's population and well-being. So, like, perhaps maybe they shouldn't be there. Maybe the French shouldn't have taken over this fucking country.
Remaining within the Indo-Pacific region, we'll refocus a bit on the area of Western New Guinea, the western half of the island of New Guinea that is politically controlled by Indonesia, like the other half of the island that's independent under Papua New Guinea.
Bro, it's just like Britain, France, Spain, the United States. Well, before it was the United States completely. And Russia and Germany. All these companies, all these countries have just always wanted to take over other land and not just let the people be. It's ridiculous.
Western New Guinea is one of the most remote, isolated, and undeveloped corners of the world remaining in the 21st century. Home to only about 5.6 million people today in an area that's larger than Japan, it's also one of the most sparsely populated regions of the world as well. The area is so remote and its mountainous jungle interior so difficult to access that it's estimated there are still at least 40 uncontacted tribes remaining there who maintain no contact with the outside world and continue living a prehistoric hunter-gatherer.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Can we not, like, just have societies like that that still exist? Like, why not? Why don't people want that to still exist?
Or lifestyle. More than 400
Not everybody
languages
has
are
to have an iPhone.
believed to be spoken in Western New Guinea, while the largest settlement in the territory, Jayapura, is more than 3,700 kilometers or 2,300 miles away from Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, about as far away as London is from Armenia. As a result, the culture and ethnicity in Western New Guinea is extremely different and isolated from the rest of Indonesia, and there's been an ongoing separatist movement in the region for decades, pretty much ever since Indonesia took the area over. When Indonesia declared its independence from the Netherlands in August of 1945, it initially didn't include the western half of New Guinea, which still remained under Dutch colonial control. The Dutch wanted to retain their own control over Western New Guinea and effectively turn it into a self-governing territory of theirs. But Indonesia fiercely contested this, asserting that it was the legal successor to all of the territory of the former Dutch East Indies, which included all of Western New Guinea too. A decade and a half later, in 1961, the Dutch prepared to grant Western New Guinea their separate independence, which led to the first raising of the region's Morning Star flag in its history, a symbol that is—
Chat, if you couldn't tell by how long you are in the video by now, I am all for countries remaining how they want to remain. Like, you don't need to be taken over by a bigger, more powerful country. Like, just leave the people alone, bro.
It's ever since become deeply attached to the West Papuan.
Because almost every time we take over another country, and I'm saying we, as in every country that's ever existed, every time you take over another country, almost every time, let me say, you fucked them over, bro.
Independence movement. But Indonesia's fierce
ridiculous.
opposition to this development led to them and the Netherlands coming together to negotiate the New York Agreement in 1962, which made it so that instead of becoming outright independent, Western New Guinea's authority would be temporarily transferred from the Dutch to the United Nations, and then later transferred again to the Indonesian government, who would then handle the preparation for a self-determination referendum in the territory to take place that would determine its ultimate future. In the years that then followed, Indonesian government forces reportedly began arresting and exiling pro-independence political activists and leaders in the territory. And when they finally allowed a referendum on the territory's status to take place in 1969, rather than opening it up to everybody in the territory with one vote per person, the Indonesians only granted a total of 1,022 local representatives that they had handpicked to take part in the referendum the right to actually vote on it, who naturally all voted unanimously to merge Western New Guinea with Indonesia.
No shit, bro. What the fuck? Why are they allowed to just do that?
Indonesian authorities have argued ever since that that system of representative voting was necessary because of the territory's geographically difficult terrain, remoteness, and the lack of development in the region. But nonetheless, a militant pro-independence movement was born in Western New Guinea that has since evolved into the modern Free Papua movement, which continues to violently fight against the Indonesian state for the independence of Western New Guinea. And since 2021, the movement has been considered as a terrorist organization by the Indonesian government, while even flying the movement's Morning Star flag is legally considered by the Indonesian government to be treason that can carry up to a 7 to 20-year prison sentence. And since the Indonesian government is very strict about allowing foreign journalists permission to enter the territory, the information on what exactly the situation looks like in the territory from an independence perspective is very difficult to parse. So, who really ultimately knows? Western New Guinea could eventually become an independent country and free itself from Indonesian rule like East Timor did before it in 2002. Or it might also not. But either way, another island territory that's probably a lot more certain to eventually become an independent country one day is going to be Greenland. Greenland is currently governed as an autonomous territory belonging to the Kingdom of Denmark, as it has for centuries ever since 1814 when Denmark acquired the territory from Norway.
I guess I always forget about that. I definitely always forget about that. Because I'm always like, oh wait, Greenland's a country. I mean, they are owned by a different country as well, though.
At that time, Denmark fully incorporated Greenland into the Danish state in 1953, when it granted all of Greenland's residents Danish citizenship, while in 1979, Denmark granted Greenland a referendum on home rule that was approved. while a further referendum on increasing the island's self-government even more was granted in 2008 that was also approved by 75% of voters, that transferred most of the Danish government's authorities and responsibilities in Greenland to the local Greenlandic government, leaving pretty much only Greenland's foreign and defense policies, monetary policy, and citizenship policy still in the hands of Denmark. Despite its huge geographic size, though, Greenland's population is very small today at only about 57,000 people, only about the same as a medium-sized town. And about 90% of this small population on the island are ethnically Inuit, while most of the remaining 10% are composed of Danes and other European ethnicities. Under the terms of the 2008 self-government referendum that was overwhelmingly approved in Greenland, the island was also granted the right by Denmark to hold an independence referendum whenever they wanted to determine the island's ultimate political status and future. Despite this legal ability to call a referendum, though, there has long been a lot of hesitation within Greenland to actually move forward with full-scale independence rather than maintaining the status quo as an autonomous part of Denmark. Denmark currently maintains a generous annual subsidy to the island of $500 million a year, which accounts for 20% of Greenland's entire small economy, and provides for more than half of the local Greenlandic government's budget. Moreover,
I mean, I feel like 500 million. That's not even that much, right? Like for a whole entire country? I mean, he said generous, but like I feel like that's not a lot. Right? Am I crazy?
Through Denmark, Greenlandic residents are also all citizens of the European Union as well. If Greenland decided to go their own separate way from Denmark, they would almost certainly lose the Danish subsidies and lose their EU citizenship as well, which would almost certainly negatively affect the Greenlandic economy. Nonetheless, support for independence in Greenland appears to remain fairly high. A 2019 poll conducted by the University of Copenhagen in Greenland found that a whopping 67.7% of adults in Greenland desired the island to become a fully independent state at some point in the future, with 32.4% of Greenlandic adults further insisting that secession will still benefit their economy and improve their living conditions. In April of 2023, the movement for full Greenlandic independence appeared to advance significantly when the Greenlandic Parliament unveiled its first ever draft constitution that Greenland could one day rely upon if it ever comes to negotiating its independence from Denmark. In the event that Greenland hosts a referendum on independence that passes, this draft constitution will become the framework for a final constitution.
How cold does it get there? Because I feel like they're not even, like, there's a fuck ton of snow around them. And I feel like they're not even wearing that much clothing. Like warm clothing, winter clothing.
That'll transform Greenland into an independent republic. And though no discussions on a timeline for an independence referendum have been put forward yet, the next parliamentary election in Greenland is currently scheduled for next year in 2025. And its results could indicate whether or not the independence movement on the island will move further forward. It therefore wouldn't be terribly surprising if Greenland one day soon does actually host a legal referendum on independence that passes and makes itself one of the world's newest independent countries in the process, while other prospective independent country candidates may find it difficult to secure the right to a legal referendum of their own. One other such prospective candidate is Scotland, where the idea of an independent Scottish nation
Scotland forever!
has been around for a very long time. Scotland indeed was an independent kingdom for many centuries across the Middle Ages, and fought many wars against England to maintain that independence. Scotland was first joined with England in a personal union in 1603, when the King of Scotland at the time, James VI, also became the King of England at the same time as John I. A century later, Scotland and England were formally unified politically into a single kingdom through the Acts of Union in 1707, that established the modern United Kingdom as we still know it today, though Scotland continued to maintain its
That's
own
actually
separate regional
crazy.
identity and culture.
That the United Kingdom has been a thing for that long? Like what?
All throughout the centuries. The modern movement for Scottish independence from the UK began to gain momentum in the late 20th century, and by 1999, the UK government allowed for the establishment of a devolved Scottish parliament that came under the governing authority of the pro-independence Scottish National Party, or SNP, by 2007. And then by
The Dream SMP?
2011, the SNP had won the outright majority of seats in the Scottish Parliament, which the British government agreed to legally grant them 3 years later in 2014.
What is this child's
The British
hairstyle?
government agreed to legally...
What? What is this? Who did this? Who did this?
grant them 3 years later in 2014. In the Scotland-wide referendum that took place that year, voters were asked point blank, should Scotland be an independent country? The previous months and years worth of intense campaigning from both the Remain and Leave sides of the question led to a significant 84.6% voter turnout in Scotland that saw more than 3.6 million Scots going to the polls. And in the end, after the votes had been counted and tallied, the choice to remain with the UK was clear, with 55.3% of voters choosing to remain with the UK and rejecting independence.
That's
up against
that's very
44.7%
interesting.
of voters who had answered the question with a yes and were in favor of independence. But then just 2 years later in 2016, the UK hosted another referendum that this time the entire country participated in on whether or not the country should remain or withdraw from the European Union. Referred to as the Brexit referendum, it saw a total nationwide voter turnout of 72.2%, in which a slight majority of voters, 51.9% of them, selected that the UK should withdraw from the European Union, while 48.1% of voters chose to remain in the EU. The vote set into motion the process of the UK formally withdrawing from the European Union, which was completed
It's so interesting how the result changes over, like, what he said, 2 years?
years later in 2020. But during the 2016 Brexit vote, not all parts of the UK voted equally. England and Wales both largely voted to leave the EU, while London, Northern Ireland, and Scotland all voted more largely to remain. Within Scotland, voters were significantly more in favor of remaining with the EU than elsewhere in the country, with 62% of Scottish voters in the referendum choosing to remain in the EU compared with only 38% who voted to leave. One of the primary reasons that many Scottish voters had chosen to remain within the UK back in the previous 2014 referendum was, at the time, the perceived headache that would happen with Scotland leaving the UK and therefore leaving the EU as well, which would have left Scotland outside of the EU and forced them to reapply to join back in, which would have ended up taking an unknown amount of time to get themselves re-accepted. But then, after 2016, it became clear that the UK was leaving the EU anyway and dragging Scotland along with it, which quickly led to frequent demands from the Scottish National Party on hosting a second referendum on Scottish independence, since the material circumstances of the UK's position in the European Union had fundamentally changed. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, requested another independence referendum from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson in 2019,
Boris
which was denied
Johnson!
on the basis that the 2014 referendum was supposedly a once-in-a-generation
Bro, it's literally the British Donald Trump. I'm sorry.
event.
You can't
then,
convince
in January
me
of
otherwise.
2021, Sturgeon again claimed that a second independence referendum would be held if the pro-independence parties won a majority of seats in that year's Scottish parliamentary election, which indeed ended up happening. And so then in June of 2022, Sturgeon proposed that a second independence referendum would be held a year later in October of 2023, provided that the legality and constitutionality of the referendum was guaranteed. So she again requested another referendum from the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, which was once again refused. Then in November of 2022, the UK Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the legal authority or the power to unilaterally call for another independence referendum. And so Sturgeon's current stance is that the next upcoming UK general election in January of 2025 will serve as a de facto referendum on Scotland's independence anyway. The legal route to Scotland holding another referendum on independence anytime soon is now in seriously grave doubt, while opinion polling on the matter in Scotland has shown a recent trend further towards favoring independence. After the Supreme Court's final judgment in November of 2022, the first 5 polls conducted showed that a slight
Whoa. That architecture looks crazy. Wait, this whole complex of buildings here and architecture, that shit's fire. It looks like a Skate 3 map.
majority of Scots were in favor of independence, ranging from between 51% and 56% in favor, while a separate nationwide poll showed that for the very first time, a majority of all UK residents, 55% of them, expressed support for the Scottish government being granted the right to hold a second referendum on independence. So again, who really knows how this will all shape up in the future? Legally,
I'm sorry, but I'm so curious. How do you conduct a band while riding a horse?
Expressed support for the Scottish government being granted the right to hold a second referendum on it.
How do you conduct It's not even a marching band because they're on horses. How does that work?
Independence. So, again, who really knows how this will all shape up in the future? Legally, the path to Scotland's independence currently seems pretty closed at this point. But if opinion polling continues to suggest that a majority of Scots are in favor of independence, the British government may eventually not be able to ignore the demands of a second referendum forever. But it can also always turn into a similar situation that's been going on in Spain for decades now with their own major separatist movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country. The Catalans are a Romance ethnic group who traditionally straddle the eastern Mediterranean shore of the Iberian Peninsula.
This is the type of shit that I'm interested in, because, like, there's places that I didn't even know existed, like this.
Catalans trace their history in the region back centuries, while their language, Catalan, is a Romance language, but one that is distinctly different from the neighboring Spanish or French. In the modern-day region of Catalonia in northeastern Spain, roughly 37.6% of the population today are native speakers of Catalan over Spanish, which is about 3 million people there. However, the modern independence movement in Catalonia can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when a sense of separate Catalan nationalism began taking root that considered their identity as being distinctly separate from that of Spain. In 1931, after the proclamation of the Second Spanish Republic, Catalonia was granted wide-sweeping autonomy and home rule within Spain with its own local parliament and even its own separate elected president. But then, after the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 ended with a victory for the nationalist side and the establishment of an authoritarian dictatorship under General Francisco Franco, Catalonia's previous and brief era of autonomy was completely crushed and reversed. The Catalan language was completely banned and repressed as the Francoist regime attempted to enforce a unified Spanish culture and language across the entire country. Francoist Spain continued to exist until Franco himself died decades later in 1975, which finally allowed Catalan culture and political parties to begin re-emerging and advocating for the restoration of their autonomy once again. With the restoration of democracy in Spain in 1977, Catalonia received a new Statute of Autonomy from the Spanish government in 1979. And then, decades later...
We should just, like, make this its own country as well. Like, this area right here. Just because I think it would look better.
2006, when a socialist government was in power in Madrid that was more sympathetic to Catalan rights, a referendum in Catalonia was allowed to be held that would
Matter of fact, we should, like, cut it right down, like, right, like this. So there's no ridges here. So we should just give that, the rest of that line that's right there, just give that to, that's Portugal, right, next to it. Yeah, just give it to them.
To Catalan rights, a referendum in Catalonia was allowed to be held that would expand the region's political and cultural autonomy even further, with a brand new statute that was approved of by voters and then by both the Catalan and Spanish governments. But then just 4 years later after that, in 2010, the Spanish Constitutional Court ruled on the new autonomy law and effectively gutted it, rewriting 14 of the law's articles and dictating the interpretation for 27 additional articles. This was the event that triggered huge protests all across Catalonia that included a march in Barcelona of more than 1 million people strong. And as time went on from there, the angry calls within Catalonia gradually shifted from increased autonomy to outright independence. By 2012, a poll released by the Center for Opinion Studies run by the Catalan government showed that support for Catalonia's...
I'm sorry, but... Latin women are just so beautiful. I'm sorry. I just had to say that.
Independence within the territory had risen to an unprecedented level of 57%. And then the UK agreeing to grant Scotland the legal right to host their own independence
like
referendum
South American,
added further fuel to the fire.
Mexican,
parties across
Spanish,
the political spectrum in Catalonia formed a coalition
so,
calling for the region's independence. The Catalan government demanded a formal independence referendum be granted to them, which the Spanish government simply refused to allow. Nonetheless, in spite of the Spanish government's refusal to allow a legal referendum to take place, the Catalan political authorities organized an illegal referendum anyway in 2017 that generated an incredible amount of controversy and drama. Before the referendum was even held on the 1st of October of that year, the Spanish government and Constitutional Court declared the referendum to be unconstitutional and illegal a few weeks beforehand. while the Spanish police began a wide-scale crackdown of the referendum and polling stations all across Catalonia leading up to the vote and after it, which included physical assaults on voters and seized ballots. Anti-independent
That's so crazy. Like, to see clips like that, that's of the police doing that just because they don't like something somebody's doing. It's actually wild. Like, they're not even doing crimes. That's the thing.
independence parties in Catalonia declared a boycott of the vote. And so when the referendum was finally held on the 1st of October 2017, voter turnout came in very low at only 43% of registered voters. Still, 92% of those voters, representing more than 2 million people, or about 38% of all of Catalonia's registered voters, still chose yes on the referendum to secede from Spain and form an independent Catalonia. Within weeks, the Catalan government issued its formal declaration of independence from Spain, which prompted the Spanish government to respond with the nuclear option. The Spanish Senate voted to seize control of Catalan government institutions, while Spain's prime minister used his executive powers to dismiss Catalonia's president Carles Puigdemont and his entire cabinet, while fresh elections in Catalonia were called up to happen 2 months later. The Spanish police raided the offices of Catalonia's government leaders and arrested many on unprecedented charges of rebellion, while the former Catalonian
insane.
president fled into exile for Belgium. Most of the leaders were later pardoned in 2021, but Catalonia's 2017 attempt to secede from the country was resoundingly crushed by the Spanish authorities. Nonetheless, support within Catalonia for at least a legally recognized independence referendum continues to appear very high. An April 2023 poll suggested that 77% of
Bro,
respondents
it's
in
crazy because I guarantee you the only reason they're doing all this is because they don't want to lose part of their country. Which, like, in all honesty, it's not even that big of a part of their country.
high. An April 2023
High.
poll suggested that 77% of respondents in Catalonia at least supported being granted the right to hold a legally recognized referendum, while only about 43% of the respondents in the same poll said that they still favored an independent status for Catalonia. One of the biggest reasons that the Spanish authorities are so opposed to the idea of Catalan independence is that if they happen to grant it, it might end up opening up a Pandora's box of potential possibilities, and open up the chance for more of Spain's ethnic and linguistic minorities to demand their own independences next. Besides the Catalans, the Basques have been the most historically independent-minded group of people in Spain, and they would be the most likely ones to demand their own independence next. The concept of the Basque Country extends across the borders of Spain and France along the western edge of their border, where about 3 million Basque people live today, the vast majority of whom all live on the Spanish side. The indigenous language that is spoken by the Basque people is highly unique in the context of Europe at large. The Basque language is the sole surviving Paleo-European language on the continent that remains indigenously spoken today, and it predates the arrival of any of
Wait,
the
that's fire.
Indo-European languages that came during the Bronze Age. As a result, the Basque language is classified as a very rare language isolate, remaining linguistically unrelated to any other known language still spoken on the planet. Roughly 28.4%
That's so
of the
fire.
people in the Basque Country speak the Basque language natively today, which
That's
is about
so cool, bro.
750,000 people, 700,000 of whom live in Spain in a concentrated arc across the Spanish northeast coast with the Atlantic near the border with France. And just like with the Catalan language, the Basque language was also banned and harshly repressed within Spain during the Francoist era, and
That's so
influenced by
stupid.
national liberation events that were going on elsewhere at the time of the early 1960s. In the context of decolonization, a militant Basque separatist organization known as ETA formed in 1959, with the
I hate that we can't just let people speak the language that they know. That they know and that they want to speak, bro.
explicit goal
Let them talk. Freedom of speech.
of using violence to secure the independence of a Basque state. This was the beginning of the Basque conflict, a half a century of violence between ETA and the Spanish state that would last all the way up until 2011. During that time, more than 1,000 people, several hundred of whom were civilians, were killed as a result of the violence that included bombings and assassinations, while more than 22,000 others were injured in what has sometimes been described as the longest modern war fought in Western Europe, a war that continued for decades longer even after Franco died, and the Basque Country was granted wide-scale autonomy along with Catalonia in 1979. ETA was classified as a terrorist organization by Spain, France, the UK, US, and the European Union. But then, after decades of violence, ETA finally announced an end to their armed struggle against the Spanish state only in 2011, and they eventually fully disbanded themselves altogether just in 2018. The Basque region of Spain is these days generally considered to have the highest degree of autonomy of any non-state actor in the European Union, where they're even allowed to collect and keep their own taxes. And while an independence referendum has never been hosted in the Basque Country by Spain before, the support for holding one among the Basques appears to remain fairly strong. Polling in the Spanish Basque Country has shown a...
Alright, maybe I see why Spain was so mad, because there's apparently two different groups that want land as their own country
steady
within Spain.
Increase in the desire for Basque independence that's generally followed along with the same modern trend that's been seen in Catalonia. A 2010 poll from the University of the Basque Country found that only 30% of Basques supported independence at the time, compared to 55% who were against it. But then another poll they conducted 4 years later in 2014 showed that support had shifted towards 34% who were in favor of independence, up against 52% who were opposed to it. While polling since 2020 has shown significantly more support for independence than before. The first Naziometroa National Barometer poll, which seeks to regularly measure the feelings on independence in the Basque Country, took place in 2020, and it found that 42.5% of respondents were in favor of independence, up against 31.5% who were opposed to it. Then the second Naziometroa poll in March of 2021 showed 39.5% in favor of independence, up against 29.5% opposed to it. And then the most recent third Naziometroa poll conducted in November of 2021 showed that 40.5% of respondents were in favor of independence, compared with just 29.2% who were opposed to it. So, who knows? Maybe, like Catalonia, if the desire for independence within the Basque Country continues growing and eventually gets too large for the Spanish government to simply ignore, a referendum may eventually be granted. And if Catalonia ever manages its independence first, it's probably a certainty that the Basques won't be far behind them next. I think that at least at this rate, the odds of Scotland, Catalonia, or the Basque Country one day becoming independent are greater than the biggest historical separatist movement over in the Western Hemisphere ever succeeding.
I wonder what a referendum in Texas would look like, because, like, I've heard so many people say that Texas should be its own country, but I kind of want to see what it would be like if they did hold a referendum. And if they did already do that, let me know, because like I did not know. I would have not been aware of that.
Quebec has always been a unique province in Canada, being the only one with a predominantly French-speaking majority and culture.
Québécois.
Quebec's population today is roughly 9 million people, and the province's sole official language is French. And
that's where
XQC
is from.
English. As of the most recent 2021 Canadian census, French is the native language of more than 78% of Quebec's population, while roughly 94% of the province's population speaks French fluently, compared to only 8% of the population who lists English as their native language, and only 52% of the population who consider themselves even fluent in English, which is about on the same level of English proficiency as Greece. Quebec has therefore always been an isolated bubble of the French language in the Americas, surrounded on all of its sides by English speakers, which has always contributed to a certain feeling of separateness and nationalism within Quebec that has never really gone away. The peak of Quebec nationalism happened in the 1980s and 1990s, though, when the province hosted 2 referendums on their independence from Canada. The first one came in 1980, which saw a significant 85.6% voter turnout that saw the Remain with Canada side win handedly with a total of 59.6% of the vote,
Damn.
compared to the Leave side that only managed to secure 40.4% of the vote. But then 15 years later came Quebec's second and much more controversial and closer independence referendum in 1995. This time, the second independence referendum became a massive spectacle in Quebec that saw the active participation and input of virtually everybody in the province. The second referendum secured what has remained the largest voter turnout in all of Quebec's entire history, with a whopping 93.5% of registered voters in the province taking part in the decision. And the final vote was razor thin. The Remain with Canada side just narrowly won in 1995 with just 50.6% of the total
Holy
vote,
shit.
compared with 49.4% of voters who chose to leave and make Quebec an independent country. The difference between the Remain and Leave sides was merely 54,288 votes, out of a total population of registered voters in Quebec at the time of 5,087,000, meaning that just 1% of the population carried the entire political future of Quebec at the time. But ever since the narrow failure of the Quebec nationalists to secure the province's independence in 1995, the support for further separatism in Quebec appears to have gradually dwindled away, but has still never completely gone away altogether. A recent poll from Le Devoir, a French-language newspaper in Montreal, was conducted in 2023 that found that current support for Quebec separatism stands at just 38% of the province's population. A far cry from the more than 49% who voted for independence
that shit
back
fell
in
off.
1995. But the data from that poll suggests something even more alarming to the
I want to see what the poll would be like for joining the United States as the 51st state.
Independence side in Quebec. Most of the support for Quebec separatism remaining comes from older people 55 years and over, while support for Quebec separatism among the younger generations in the province is significantly lower.
So you're telling me all the people that wanted to leave Canada died off? Interesting.
Means that as the years continue passing on, support for Quebec separatism, while still kind of substantial today, will continue dwindling away simply due to the attrition of the older cohort that more strongly supports independence dying off, and the younger generations replacing them who more strongly oppose independence. And from here on, just about every other possible independence movement remaining in the world that could happen gets pretty speculative if it hasn't been enough already. For example, it's possible that an independent Kurdish state could one day coalesce in the center of the Middle East. The Kurds are their own ethnic group who number somewhere between 30 and 45 million people in the area and span across the modern borders of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, the governments of which have always been opposed to the emergence of an independent Kurdish state for the simple reason that if the Kurds ever emerged independent in one of them, they would likely work together to take over the territory of all the others as well.
Wait, what? How did we get to that conclusion?
Of an independent Kurdish state for the simple reason that if the Kurds ever emerged independent in one of them, they would likely work together to take over the territory of all the others as well. The Kurdish inhabited lands also include the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and rich oil fields in the lands they inhabit in Iraq,
shit!
Which together would almost
not the oil fields, bro. We don't fuck. We're not fucking around with the oil fields, bro.
Will certainly mean that any unified independent Kurdish state would become a major geopolitical power that everyone else in the region would then have to reckon with. As a result, the Kurds are generally considered to be among the largest stateless people in the modern 21st century world. The Iraqi Kurds have, however, accomplished their own political autonomy within Iraq ever since 1992, after the US began enforcing a no-fly zone over their territory that allowed them to achieve the leverage they needed against the Iraqi central government in Baghdad to secure it, which established the autonomous Kurdistan regional government.
Wait, is that still standing today, though? This was a year ago. Oh, wait, I'm fucking stupid. Iran's the one that is having beef with other countries right now. I'm so fucking stupid. Oh my god. Anyways.
KRG in northern Iraq. Much later on in 2017, the KRG decided to host a unilateral referendum on their independence from Iraq that, much like the unilateral Catalonia independence referendum, was deemed illegal by the Iraqi central government in Baghdad. Nonetheless, the KRG went ahead with the 2017 independence referendum anyway that saw a pretty large 72.2% voter turnout that resulted in a completely overwhelming vote of 92.7% in favor of the KRG's independence, up against only 7.3% of voters who chose to remain with Iraq. However, the Iraqi government refused to recognize the results of the referendum, declared it illegal, and then launched a full-blown military offensive into the KRG's territory in retaliation. The Iraqi army then overran roughly 20% of the KRG's administered territory and killed hundreds of people in the process, which forced the KRG into conceding and canceling the results of the referendum. At the same time, the Syrian Kurds have also achieved their own de facto autonomy through force since the Syrian civil war began next door. But, unlike the Iraqi Kurds, they have always stopped just short of asserting their own independence from Syria, officially only claiming their own autonomous status within Syria, which the Assad regime in Syria still doesn't even recognize as legitimate. If the Syrian Kurds ever took things a step further and declared their own independence like the Iraqi Kurds attempted to do in 2017, or which Turkish Kurd separatist factions like the PKK have been attempting to also do for decades, then it would almost certainly trigger at least an immediate Turkish invasion or intervention to stop them from doing so, since Turkey would then fear that if they succeeded, they would use their own independence to foment unrest in the Kurdish-inhabited area of southeastern Turkey. And so, since the Turkish, Syrian, and Iraqi governments would and have opposed any and all moves towards formal Kurdish independence, it's a development that's not exceptionally likely to happen anytime soon. And similar to the Kurds, there's also the potential, no matter how slim, for an independent state for the Tuareg people in northern Africa to eventually emerge through force as well. The Tuareg—
that is so much territory from other countries that they would be taking over. That's actually so wild.
Are a large nomadic Berber ethnic group numbering around 4 million people, whose territory spans across the modern borders of Mali, Niger, Libya, and Algeria. Since 1916, there have been at least 5—
Is that how you pronounce that country?
Borders of Mali, Niger.
Niger? Is that actually how you pronounce that? I thought it was pronounced like Nai, and then Gur. I don't know.
Libya and Algeria. Since 1916, there have been at least 5 major Tuareg rebellions in this area demanding the creation of their own independent state.
Sorry, got
the
bored.
most successful of all of them was the most recent one that happened in 2012. Back then, Tuareg rebels managed to overrun the entirety of northern Mali, including Mali's most populated northern cities, Timbuktu and Gao. The Tuareg rebels then seized the moment to unilaterally declare the independence of a state that they called Azawad in April of 2012. A state that they envisioned as becoming the homeland for the Tuareg people that encompassed roughly 60% of Mali's internationally recognized territory. But then, shortly afterwards, Islamist factions within Azawad, including Al-Qaeda, effectively co-opted the movement for themselves and then decided to expand their ambitions by launching an invasion into the rest of Mali to try and take over the entire country, which then prompted a huge French military intervention against them that rapidly saw French forces recapture all of Mali's territory and destroy Azawad about as soon as it appeared, without any other country ever offering Azawad any form of diplomatic recognition. Then in February of 2013, with all of its territory lost, the Tuaregs formally renounced their prior claim of independence for Azawad and asked Mali to begin reincorporating them back into the country. But in recent years, the Azawad movement has witnessed a bit of a comeback again. Mali experienced back-to-back coups d'etats in 2020 and 2021 that brought a new anti-French military junta into power in the country that decided to expel all French troops from the country by 2022. And they began welcoming in Russian troops from the Wagner Group to assist them against rebels in the country instead. In the ensuing chaos that followed, the Azawad movement has regained significant momentum and ground. And currently, as of 2024, it controls a large swath of Mali's north once again. If they're able to expand on their success and take back control over major towns in the area like Timbuktu and Gao again, it could only be a matter of time before Azawad unilaterally redeclares their own independence in northern Mali again. And the question this time will be if anybody intervenes to stop them again, or if anybody will decide to just simply recognize them this time. Meanwhile, in Cameroon, down in sub-Saharan Africa, there are the potential conditions emerging for yet another possible new candidate country to emerge in the near future as well. This time in the form of a potential new country known as Ambazonia in Cameroon's extreme west. The issue here dates back to the colonial period, where for decades between 1916 and 1961, modern-day Cameroon was divided between a larger French colony in the east and a smaller British colony in the west, who directly influenced the pattern of Cameroon's 2 dominant languages today, French and English. French has naturally remained the dominant language spoken in the bigger part of Cameroon that used to be a French colony, and 41% of the country's total population currently speaks French. Meanwhile, English has remained the dominant spoken language in the smaller part of Cameroon that used to be a British colony, and so about 16% of Cameroon's overall population speaks English. This has led to a long-standing issue within Cameroon ever since the country's independence that's known as the Anglophone problem, where the English-speaking minority in far western Cameroon has often felt disenfranchised and locked out by certain policies and actions enacted by the majority French-speaking Cameroonian government. In 2016, wide-scale protests in the smaller Anglophone part of Cameroon broke out that the mostly French-speaking Cameroonian government decided to violently crack down on, which led the Anglophones in Western Cameroon deciding to launch a separatist insurgency, which eventually led to a group of Anglophones to unilaterally declare the independence of the Western Anglophone region of Cameroon as the independent state of Ambazonia. This led the Cameroonian government to openly declare war on the Ambazonian separatists, and the Cameroonian army was ordered in to restore the government's authority, which sparked the Cameroonian Civil War, or the Anglophone crisis in the country, that has continued on ever since. Thousands of people have been killed by the conflict since then, and hundreds of thousands more have been forcefully displaced. And as it currently stands, the Cameroonian government controls most of the large cities and population centers in the Anglophone region, while the Ambazonian separatists still control large swaths of the area's rural countryside. If they are eventually successful in their rebellion, then the Ambazonian separatists will almost certainly attempt to gain formal recognition of their independence as Africa's newest state, like South Sudan and Eritrea became before them through force. But they still might not become the world's newest country that emerges through force of arms.
Wait, whoa,
in Yemen, the long civil war in the country is reaching its 10-year anniversary of beginning, with no immediate end still in sight. But as it currently stands now, as it has for many years, there are three major factions in the war that could eventually negotiate for peace. The Iran-backed Houthis and the Saudi-backed Republic of Yemen are decidedly not separatist entities. They both want full political control over the entirety of Yemen's internationally recognized territory, and they both officially claim to be all of Yemen's rightful and legitimate government. Meanwhile, the third major faction in the war, the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, is explicitly a secessionist faction that seeks for the re-establishment and independence of the former South Yemen again, just like it used to exist for decades in the 20th century between 1967 and 1990, before it was absorbed into the former North Yemen that created the unified Yemen that existed up until the Civil War began in 2014.
I had to check something. No, you're
if
good.
the Southern Transitional Council is successful in its desires and negotiations whenever a formal peace settlement is made in Yemen, then it's very possible we could end up seeing the geopolitical return of South Yemen to the world's maps again, and a return back to the era of a politically divided Yemen, which is more of the historical reversion to the mean in the area when you consider that Yemen has been politically divided between a north and a south for centuries, and its recent union between 1990 and 2014 was a pretty major aberration in this otherwise long history of divided rule. Countries might come and go on the international stage all the time, but pretty much all countries have governments that want to track their citizens' activities and restrict their citizens'
You want some push-ups? No, not right now. Not really, to be honest.
access to certain websites, apps, and entertainment options. And that's where this video sponsor NordVPN comes into play.
NordVPN sponsorship. I'm also sponsored. And that's all I'm gonna say on the matter. Very good. Very, very good service. I have a code, but I don't remember what my code is. It's on my Twitch channel though. But yeah, I think that's the end of the video. Yeah, he just proceeds to talk about the sponsorship for 2 more minutes. But yeah, Norton VPN better? No. No. Nope. Nope. Anyways, chat, that was a good video. Very good video. W reaction. W creator. I'm not gonna lie, I watch this guy's videos all the fucking time. Go subscribe. I put the link in chat while I was live. So if you want to check out his channel, you can. And like and subscribe. I'll see y'all later.